there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day.
In the beginning, God created. He created the vast new universe, and all its rivers containing life-giving waters flowed through the garden, keeping everything alive and growing. The waters were teeming with fish and frogs. It was a beautiful garden, and God walked in it regularly. In that garden, God decided to do his most amazing miracle. He chose to make a creature in his own image, a creature that could take care of the garden, tend to its needs, and enjoy its harvest. So in this garden, the Garden of Eden, God breathed life into bodies he formed from the dirt. He created humanity, both male and female, together in his image. The man, Adam, and the woman, Eve, were united together, and they walked with God. For unity is the image of the God who is three in one. But alas, unity would be broken. Because of God's great love, and out of his desire to create one capable of imaging that great love, God created humans with the freedom to choose. Freedom to choose obedience or disobedience. Freedom to trust in God or to trust in themselves. Freedom to be who we were created to be, or to try to make ourselves into something we are not. In the garden, the man and the woman, with a desire to become something more than they actually were, and trusting in what they could attain by their own devices, chose the selfish path of disobedience. And selfish disobedience is the force that blazes the trail to discord and disunity. Their choice caused separation from God. He kicked them out of the garden, for the garden was to be a place of unity and union. Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, and a separation grew between God and man due to man's self-seeking choices. God immediately knew the effects of this separation. He felt the pain of broken fellowship. His dreams for unity were shattered, and his heart was broken. Adam and Eve surely felt the pain of separation. But as the generations came and went, what was missing from the human experience became unclear as relationship with God was forgotten. People turned to many idle desires, seeking to find fulfillment and joy. But only a few in each generation would realize that it was in God, our source and supplier, that wholeness could be found. God was sad, but he did not surrender. He initiated a plan to reunite humanity to himself. Heaven and earth had been one in Eden, but fall brought separation. Through the long, cold winter, God was working to bring a spring of recreation and renewal. So he planted a winter crop, planning for a harvest with the seed of Abraham. Abraham was a devout man who found, or rather was found by, the one true God. Abraham was called out of his father's country, where he had grown up worshiping many gods. The one true God called him out to plant him in a land of his choosing, a land God would clear and till, so that God's vineyard might be established there. But for this to happen, Abraham had to go. He had to leave the land he knew in anticipation of the land God had promised. He had to trust God rather than what he knew, and he took advantage of his freedom to obey.
I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you.
Abraham was chosen not so he could feel special, but so that he could carry out a special mission. the mission of reuniting heaven and earth. All peoples would be blessed by the fruit of his righteousness. Yet, Abraham had doubts. Abraham had legitimate concerns. How would God accomplish these long-range plans through a childless couple? God respected Abraham's concern. And he reassured Abraham that even in his old age, a son would come to him and Sarah.
He took him outside and said,
Look up at the heavens and count the stars, if indeed you can count them.
Then he said to him,
So shall your offspring be.
Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness.
God called Abraham to be a part of his mission. The mission of bringing something of heaven back to earth. Abraham was sent, and Abraham responded, I will go. And he went. And then God's grand plan began to unfold on God's own timeline. Sarah gave birth to Isaac, whose wife Rebekah gave birth to Jacob and Esau. Jacob had 12 children, including his favorite, Joseph, by his beloved Rachel. The family tree was growing, but God had a detour plan for the descendants of Abraham. 400 years in Egypt. Those years started out in prosperity, but then there arose a Pharaoh who knew not faith. And the Israelites became a despised race. They were enslaved by the Egyptians. But as we have come to expect, God found one who was faithful and up to the task of continuing the mission. Moses' birth was a dramatic story, and his adulthood had its own dramatic twists. He was an Israelite by birth, trained in the court of Pharaoh as an adolescent, and exiled as a young man after his anger led him into disobedience. Exiled to Midian, where he walked its hills and valleys tending his sheep. And there, Moses saw something that did not make sense. There was a bush that was on fire. It kept burning, but it did not burn up. Moses went closer, seeking to understand. Then he heard a voice that could surely explain it all.
Moses,
And Moses said,
Here I am. Do not come any closer.
God said,
Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground.
Then he said,
I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.
At this, Moses hid his face, because he was afraid to look at him. The Lord said,
I have indeed seen the misery of the people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt.
Moses was overwhelmed by the call. He wanted to shirk it, pretend it never happened. But Yahweh was relentless. Excuses were dismissed. Help was given, and Moses finally accepted his mission under the watchful eye of the great I Am. God called Moses to be a part of his mission, the mission of bringing something of heaven back to earth. Moses was sent, and Moses responded, I will go. And he went. Just like his early life, Moses' return to Egypt was eventful. One after another, 10 plagues God wrought on the Egyptians as Moses repeatedly asked Pharaoh to let God's people go. Finally, after the Passover brought death to every Egyptian home, the earthly king submitted to the heavenly, and the Israelites were sent out of Egypt. They left with great haste, for they knew Pharaoh was apt to change his mind. And he did. But at the Red Sea, God worked one of his finest miracles, which turned out to be the 11th plague for the Egyptians. Israel was free from human oppressors, but they did not yet understand the freedom to which they had been freed. Moses led them as he was led, back to the mountain where the bush had burned but had not been consumed. For you see, God had come down not only to call a man, but a people. His desire was not to redeem one family alone. No, his desire was for all people of the world. And God spoke to Israel.
You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations, you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation.
Yes, Israel was a treasured possession of God's. They held a special place in his heart. But notice God's purpose and plan for them. God's people were to be a holy nation. As a people, they were called to be the example, set apart to live as model citizens of God's creation. Immediately, God gave them the 10 Commandments as a written standard to help them live in God's holiness and to pass down to their children the way of life God intended for them. But holiness was not the only mission. Did you notice the word priests? Israel was called to be a kingdom of priests. Some think only the Levites were priests in Israel, and indeed they served a priestly role within that community. But the community itself was called to serve a priestly role in the midst of creation. To be a priest is to be a go-between, a conduit, a cord that extends the light of heaven into a dark and fallen world. The call of a priest is to be sacramental, that is to bring God to man and man to God. Israel was called to reveal the presence of God in the world and to the world for the sake of the world. Israel was called not just to act heavenly, but to indeed bring a piece of heaven to earth, that they and their neighbors might have a taste of what Adam and Eve once enjoyed. God called Israel to be a part of his mission, the mission of bringing something of heaven back to earth. Israel was sent, and Israel responded, "I will go." And they went. They went for all whom God sent. Abraham, Moses, and Israel, they were flashes of brilliance mingled with the darkness of night. The mission persisted, even when the human carrier seemed a hopeless case, and often faith faltered. Repeatedly, hope was lost. Too frequently, the called failed to love. Something extreme, something ultimate was needed. Someone greater was needed to inspire the mission. Imagine the table talk of the Trinity: Father, Son, and Spirit. We can't let them live like this forever. We have to do something. Remember the glory days in the garden when we walked with Adam and Eve? Oh, for those days! You know, it's so wonderful when one of our creatures finds us in the midst of the chaos below. Those relationships are so wonderful, but so few. Israel tries, but even they have lost their way. They are not capable of being the standard. Selfishness and seeking personal glory, that's not what we made them for. Yet, that is how they seek fulfillment. How will we show them that humility and service are the paths to true humanity? How will we teach them that loving is real living?
How will we show them? One of us must go down there. I will go and bring to them the kingdom of heaven.
The Father called the Son to be a part of His mission. The mission of bringing something of heaven back to earth. Jesus was sent, and Jesus responded, I will go. And He went. So Jesus came humbly to a young mother who gave birth on a journey in the stable of a stranger. Jesus grew, the son of a tradesman, learning the family trade. Jesus sought, as a human ought to seek, a relationship with the Father and with His people. Jesus was a holy person, keeping the commandments, living righteously, and loving vigorously. He was a priestly person, in that His very presence brought together God and man. Sacramental life. That priestly part is where the rub lies. Jesus came revealing God's way for humanity, which of course contradicted so much of how humanity was living. How would Jesus deal with the discrepancy? How would the humans? I guess you know the human way. When you object to someone's methods, you first argue against their ideas. When their ideas stand, you seek to disparage and discredit the person. Then, when the reputation of the opposition prevails, you kill them in the most expedient way. Jesus suffered this fate, but how He suffered it is noteworthy, for He handled it as a model human, a priestly person. Jesus humbled Himself like a lamb for the slaughter. He had greater strength, but since in heaven's eyes might does not make right, Jesus did not seek to physically overpower. Jesus had taught that those who try to preserve themselves are the ones that lose in the end. And He faithfully lived out His teaching. By willingly dying, He demonstrated what it really means to be alive. Death. It is the greatest fear of humanity. Fear is what drives humans to seek their own interests. Self-interest. It is this that destroys community and corrupts God's design for humanity. The search for personal glory and power, exemplified by the fruit eaten by Eve and Adam in the garden, is the opposite of what God came to show us in the Christ. As the Christ, Jesus through death entered back into the garden and brought us fruit from another tree. Now, families, if you would come up together, Jesus will share some of what He has to offer, and then each family, as you get it, you will take it over to the bags that we will be delivering and sharing shortly. And then after you do that, come on, Jason, Sophie. And children of God, we have been called to come and taste of the heavenly. We have entered into a renewed fellowship with God through Christ by the Holy Spirit. To the extent possible in this age, we have entered back into heaven. We have caught a glimpse of life in the garden. Yet we await to fully experience that life when our full reunion comes at the end of this long winter. Until Christ's kingdom is fully restored, we are called to participate in the mission of God. That mission is to make things more right in this world, and it is accomplished by a chosen people becoming a royal priesthood. That is to say, when God's people answer the call to walk in the humble, obedient, loving, united, self-sacrificing path of Jesus, they make God known to the humans around them. And making God known to humans, raising human awareness of the ever-presence of God, now that is being priesthood. That is the mission to which we were called. God calls us to be a part of His mission. The mission of bringing something of heaven back to earth. We have been sent. And so all together we respond, I will go. May it be said of us, and they